Okay, so hopefully you played around with the orientation change there. But I don't know if you noticed this, that if you change the number of buttons and then you rotate it, it may not work exactly like you had hoped. So here I'm going to change my number of buttons from 7, change it say to 5, and it should come back and say 5 buttons, and then I'm going to rotate it back into portrait mode. And uh-oh, it says 7 buttons, right? So for some reason it didn't do what we call persisting here that data, right? So it had no way of remembering that we had changed the number of buttons when we rotated things. Now that may seem a bit strange at first, but let's see what's going on. So you remember first of all that activities are managed according to this life cycle here. Where things are created, started, and resumed, and then sort of on the way out, they're paused, stopped, and finally destroyed, right? And so far, the only one of these that we've really played around with is onCreate, right? But when we actually do an orientation change, and the screen rotates, what the system needs to do to reload the layout is it actually needs to go all the way around through this whole life cycle here, right? So it's going ahead and it's going to even go so far as destroying the activity and then all the way back around, and it's going to recreate it, since onCreate is where we set the content view, right? So and it knows that there's new content this time, right? So there's that layout land activity main XML that we had created. So it's going through this whole thing here. So when it's destroyed, where does the data go, right? In the meantime, where can it live in between runs, right? So let's talk about this, and it's really a couple different stages. So for our solution, the first thing is that we need to know where to save stuff off and where to load it again. onPause, it turns out, is the first place that we could save things, and it's really the best place, right? So if your app is no longer in the foreground or it's rotated, it's going to call onPause on its way to being destroyed in the case of rotation, right? So that's where we want to save things. Now the natural sort of analog on the other side to pause is resume, which would be fine, except for rotation. We actually want to do it in onCreate, since again that's where the content view is being loaded, right? So that's where to put things. Now the question is, what do we put there? And the second idea, right, second part of our solution, is to use what we called shared preferences. And these are very similar to some things that we've seen recently, to intent extras, right? They're key value pairs that are going to be shared between the activities. Now they're actually even simpler than extras in terms of the types of data that you can put there. So you really have essentially these 5 types, and I think it will give you, it'll let you save sets of strings all at once. But very straightforward, right? Booleans, floats, ints, longs, and strings, and that's about it, right? So we wanna save the number of buttons off, right? Okay, so how do we use shared preferences? The first thing is that we need access to the ones that we have. If we wanted ones just for an activity, there's a get preferences one that we use. You can also, if you want one that's shared across the whole application, so really shared between different activities, then you just need to give it a name. So this is actually what we're going to use right here, just because it's a little bit more general. So we're going to just create our own key here. So we'll just call it prefs, and then we'll call get shared preferences on our activity, and we'll give it some kind of a mode here. Turns out private is the right thing, and then we're going to save off those preferences. So that's one part. And then once we have preferences, then we edit them by using an inner class on shared preferences called the editor class, right? So if we call this little factory method right here, hey prefs, give me an editor, right? And then save it off. Then I can put data into it, and then I just call commit, right? So let's go ahead and do that in Eclipse. All right, so loading Eclipse, I'm going to create an onPause method here. So when I pause it, I want to save off my data. So I'll start to type it, Control Space, and it's going to ask me if I want to override the default onPause, which I'd like to do. and we'll let it call this the superclass. No harm there. And within this, we want to go ahead and get the shared preferences, right? So shared preferences prefs equals, and it's going to be this dot get shared preferences, and we need a name, and this is going to be our constant, right? So when we save them, when we load them, we're just going to use the same name, and the mode is going to be should be mode private is fine. All right, let's go ahead and make this constant right here. So up top, let's see, along with my other strings, let's see, this one can be private since I only need it in the activity. Private static final string prefs equals prefs, the string value, like so. And we'll go ahead and import shared preferences. All right, and then I want the shared preferences, let's try this again, shared preferences dot editor prefs equals, and I'm going to ask, sorry, this should be editor, is going to be prefs dot, and call the edit method, make some changes, and then I will take the editor and commit those changes back. Just some sort of transactional thing right here where you can make a bunch of changes and then commit them all at once. Turns out that all we want to do is one thing here, very simple. So editor dot put, we want to put our number of buttons. That's the only thing that we care about saving, but I could save more things if I really wanted to. Put int and my key, and since this is for the number of buttons, I might as well reuse the key that I've had along this whole time, and the value will be the value of my field. So this means that whenever my activity is hidden, whenever it's rotated, wherever it's going to save this off. Okay? So where do I load it up? Well, I can go back to onCreate, gets the content view. I have a button. Let's go under here, and let's do essentially the same thing here. So shared preferences prefs equals get shared preferences prefs and mode private. All right, so this same line of code here, could have just copy and pasted it. And now I can say prefs, would you get me the integer with that key and with a default value, which I might as well give 7 here, and save that into some place where it would make sense, right? So save it into my number of buttons. So now we should have it, right? So what are we going to do with it? I think by default we haven't changed the text on it, so let's go ahead and change the text on the button. So my num buttons, nope, not that. My play button dot set text, and let's see. So where was it? I think we had it was play with X number of buttons. So we had a string for that. So get string r dot string dot, and it was something like play format. Yeah, play button format. And that expects us to give it an integer to go in for the %d. So my number of buttons. So I'll set that text. Let's go ahead and run the emulator, see what happens. Okay, loaded up my emulator. Let's see what we got here. So play with 7 buttons. Let's go ahead and change the number of buttons. Change it to 5 if we want, and then play with 5 buttons. Let's rotate the screen, bring this in. And it says now play with 5 buttons, right? So very good. Seems to be working just fine. If we were to stop our app and bring it back to the foreground, it would actually remember now that it's supposed to have 5 buttons, right? So it even remembers things between launches. All right, so very good. So sort of putting everything together. So here it is. So in the onPause, we go ahead and get the shared preferences, get an editor, make some changes to the editor, and then commit the changes. And then using it was pretty straightforward. Just in onCreate, we'll ask for the preferences again, and then just get the integers and save it in the save it into the field, and then use that to set the text on my button. Right? So very good. So I really wanted to show you shared preferences because they do have usage beyond just dealing with orientation changes. Good stuff there. It turns out if you're just doing orientation changes, you actually do have one more option, and that's this whole idea of instant state. If you've noticed that in our apps that we have a bundle, so let me go ahead here, and onCreate actually has some state that goes along with it, and we can actually access that ourselves. So we could say, whenever the screen gets rotated, we can save the instance state, and then whenever it comes back again, so to speak, we can restore it, right? And bundles are really easy to use. You don't have to worry about an editor or anything like that, and you just use get and put just like we did with intents. Very, very straightforward. I messed around with it. It works fine. So good stuff. All right, that is it for this video. All right, we'll see you later.